Are you a little edgy? Do you like the idea of a demon following your every swing? Do you like machinists but actually want to deal damage? Well, then Reaper might be the job for you. Hello there, my name is Julia, and in this guide I will be going over the abilities, the opener, rotation and utility of the Reaper job at level 90. A raid party in Final Fantasy consists of 2 tanks, 2 healers and 4 DPS. Reaper fills one of the DPS spots in the party. The scythe-wielding melee DPS revolves around building up resources in a slower build-up phase, which it then spends in bursts of damage, where their recast time is greatly decreased. A few key elements of Reaper are the Death Design debuff, which is a debuff you apply to the target, increasing the damage you deal to them by 10%. It is your goal to maintain this debuff at all times. The second key element to Reaper is Enshroud, which turns you into a vessel for your demonic avatar, reducing your recast time and allowing you to dish out fast attacks dealing moderately high damage. The Reaper job gauge consists of 2 elements you can freely move around. Let's talk about the soul gauge first. The soul gauge has 2 gauges on it, a red one and a blue one. The red one is your soul gauge. This gauge fills up whenever you use your main filler combo. You can spend this on powerful OGCD abilities, which gives you access to moderately powerful GCD actions that gives you blue gauge. The blue bar is your shroud gauge. The gauge fills up with increments of 10 whenever you use certain actions. It can then be spent on activating Enshroud, which surrenders your body to your demonic avatar, granting you access to powerful abilities that you can rapidly dish out. The next element of your gauge is called your death gauge. This gauge has 3 gauges built into it. The first is a timer, which, whenever you enter Enshroud, displays your remaining time within Enshroud. Next you have purple and blue orbs. The blue Lemur orbs can be spent on powerful GCD action, whereas the purple void orbs can be spent on either of 2 OGCD abilities. The blue orbs are given when you enter Enshroud, whereas the purple orbs are given whenever you use an Enshroud specific GCD action. Reaper naturally has a wide assortment of actions and abilities that make up its DPS rotation. Let's go through them before we talk about the rotation itself. Your main filler is a 1-2-3 combo that starts with Slice, combos into Waxing Slice and ends with Infernal Slice. Each of these GCDs generates you 10 soul gauge. For AoE encounters, your 1-2-3 combo gets replaced by a 1-2 combo. This combo starts with Spinning Scythe and ends with Nightmare Scythe. Both are circles around you and generate you 10 soul gauge each. Next is Shadow of Death. This GCD applies a debuff to a target called Death Design, which increases the damage they take from you by 10%. The debuff applied is 30 seconds long, but you can use Shadow of Death twice to stack it up to a maximum of 60 seconds. If your target dies while Death Design is active, you also gain 10 soul gauge. The AoE counterpart of this GCD is Roll of Death. It deals 1/3 of the damage but applies Death Design to all enemies within 5 yalms. Use this instead if you have 3 or more targets. Next is Soul Slice. This GCD deals some damage and increases your soul gauge by 50. The AoE counterpart is called Soul Scythe. Also start using this from 3 targets onwards. Before covering more GCDs, I want to first talk about a few OGCDs. Gluttony spends 50 soul gauge to deal 1 big hit to a target on a 60-second cooldown. Bloodstalk also spends 50 soul gauge but does less damage and has no cooldown. Both grant you a resource called Soul Reaver. Gluttony grants you 2 and Bloodstalk grants you 1. It's worth noting that using one of these actions overrides the Soul Reaver charges from the other. So spend your Soul Reaver charges first before using another Soul Reaver generating ability. These Soul Reaver charges can then be spent on 3 very fun GCDs, 2 of which are Gibbet and Gallows. Gibbet is a powerful GCD that deals extra damage if hit from the target's side or flank, whereas Gallows is a powerful GCD that deals extra damage if hit from the target's rear. Both also add 10 to your shroud gauge when used. When using Gibbet, you gain a buff called Enhanced Gallows, which makes your next Gallows deal extra damage. After using Gallows, you gain a buff called Enhanced Gibbet, which makes your next Gibbet deal increased damage. This makes it so you're forced to alternate between the usage of these 2 GCDs. It's worth noting that Soul Reavers have to be spent instantly. If you use any other GCD than Gibbet or Gallows, the charges will vanish. Bloodstock also changes into Unveiled Gibbet and Unveiled Gallows whenever you have the relative enhanced buff active. This simply increases the damage Bloodstock does and nothing more. The AoE counterpart of these 4 actions are Grimswath for Bloodstock, which also generates 1 Soul Reaver. Gluttony already deals AoE damage, so you should still be using this in AoE scenarios. And Guillotine for Gibbet and Gallows, which also requires a Soul Reaver charge to use and generates 10 Shroud Gauge. Unlike most other jobs, a lot of Reaper's AoEs are cones in front of your character, so make sure to position yourself accordingly. Next, I want to quickly mention Arcane Circle. This is your rate buff on a 2-minute cooldown. It increases the damage dealt by everyone affected by 3% for 20 seconds. From level 88 onwards, it also grants everyone in your party Circle of Sacrifice, which grants you a buff called Immortal Sacrifice whenever they execute a weapon skill or spell within the 5-second duration. These Immortal Sacrifice stacks last for 30 seconds and can be used on a GCD called Plentiful Harvest. Plentiful Harvest consumes all of your Immortal Sacrifice stacks and deals a large amount of damage, which is increased per stack consumed. It also grants you 50 Shroud Gauge afterwards. It is worth noting that only damaging spells and weapon skills count for this. This means that heals and a dancer's dance steps do not count. However, a healer should be using DPS spells in their opener, and a dancer's normal opener should still grant you a stack if timed correctly. Let's swap back to the OGCDs for a little bit with Enshroud. Enshrouds let you offer your body to your avatar, granting you 5 Lemur Shroud stacks for 30 seconds. It costs 50 Shroud Gauge to use. Once executed, several actions change. Gallows and Gibbet change into Cross Reaping and Void Reaping. These have a very short recast time and no longer have positionals bound to them. Each usage grants you a purple Void Lemur orb. They also still enhance the other, don't forget to alternate the usage. Guillotine changes to Grim Reaping, which also has a reduced cast time. The Void Lemur orbs can be spent on either Lemur Slice or Lemur Scythe, which replaces Bloodstock and Grimswath on your hotbar. Each usage costs 2 of these Void Shroud orbs. Then your last big GCD is Communio. This GCD consumes all of your remaining Lemur Shroud stacks and does a set amount of damage that does not scale per stack consumed. Use this as your last GCD inside of Enshroud. Keep in mind that Communio is a spell and takes 1.5 seconds to cast, and thus can only have 1 weave slot after it. Next is Soulsow. Soulsow is used in the pre-pull or whenever you have extended downtime. After activating it, the spell turns into Harvest Moon, which deals a hefty chunk of damage when used. Save and use Harvest Moon for moments where you are ever disconnected from the boss, or use it if the boss is about to die or become untargetable for an extended downtime. Lastly, Harpy is a spell that takes 1.5 seconds to cast and is your ranged ability. If you're ever forced to disconnect from the boss for longer than 1 GCD, then use Harpy to maintain uptime. It will not break your 1-2-3 filler combo, but do be careful as it does make your Soul Reaver charges vanish. Like all jobs, Reaper starts their encounter with an opener. Reaper's opener is fairly flexible, but I will only be covering the early Enshroud opener in this guide, as it's considered the standard all-round opener. Start by using Soulsow, then cast Harpy around 2 seconds prior to pulling. Run towards the boss and use Shadow of the Death and early weave in Arcane Circle. Use both charges of Soul Slice, and then if you're using a tincture in the opener, drink it after your second Soul Slice. Use Plentiful Harvest and weave in Enshroud. Alternate between Void Reaping and Cross Reaping for 4 usage total. Weave in Lemur Slice after your second and fourth Enshroud GCD, and finally cast Communio ending your Enshroud. Weave in Gluttony after Communio and use Gibbet. Alternate by using Gallows, weave in Unveiled Gibbet, and alternate again by using Gibbet. This is the end of your opener. It's a relatively simple opener, but could be tricky for some, as Enshroud's recast speed is relatively short. Here's an example of the opener being done. Take a moment to get used to it before continuing into the rest of your rotation. Reaper's rotation is fairly simple and can be interpreted as a priority system. Your highest priority is to use Gibbet or Gallows whenever you have a Shroud Reaver charge. Ensure to use the correct one if you have an enhanced Gibbet or Gallows buff indicated by the golden glow around the icons. Next, it's important not to drop your combo chain. Use a combo GCD if your combo is about to fall off, which occurs 30 seconds after not continuing it by using another combo GCD. Maintain the Death Design debuff at all times by using Shadow of Death when needed. 2 of them will be used during the even minute burst, so only need to use 2 more during the odd minute part of the fight. Make sure to use Arcane Circle and Plentiful Harvest strictly on cooldown. Keeping them aligned with your party's rate buffs is very important. There's only one exception to this rule for Arcane Circle. Your first Arcane Circle after the opener will be delayed by 1 GCD to align it better with your party's rate buffs. How we do this will be mentioned later on. Avoid Soul Slice charges from overcapping by using them when you have 50 or less soul gauge. Use up your Harvest Moon spell if the boss is about to die or become untargetable for longer than the 5 seconds it takes to reobtain one from the Soul Soul cost. Spend your soul gauge whenever you have 90 or less of your Shroud gauge on Bloodstock or their upgraded versions, Unveiled Gibbet and Unveiled Gallows. The same can be said for Gluttony, however, Gluttony has a cooldown. So it's key that you always have 50 soul gauge to spend on Gluttony when it comes off cooldown. If you notice Gluttony is about to come off cooldown, hold your horses and don't spend your soul gauge on Bloodstock or their upgraded versions just yet. Lastly, fill in your rotation out by using one of your combo GCDs, Slice, Waxing Slice or Infernal Slice. If you're ever forced to disconnect from the boss but they are still targetable, then use Harvest Moon first and Harpy sec if you do not have Harvest Moon anymore. If the boss becomes untargetable, then use Soul Sow to regain a charge of Harvest Moon. On 3 or more targets, you can start using the AoE counterparts of your single target actions. This includes Roll of Death instead of Shadow of Death, Soul Scythe instead of Soul Slice, Harvest Moon if available, Grimswath instead of Bloodstock and their upgraded versions, Unveiled Gibbet and Unveiled Gallows, and lastly, fill out your rotation with your 1-2 combo of Spinning Scythe and Nightmare Scythe. For Enshroud, we always try to do something called a double Enshroud window. This is where we put 2 Enshrouds into our rate buffs, which allows us to put 2 Communios into the buffs of our allies as well. This greatly increases the ADPS we do and makes our party members smile more. To pull this off, we first have to know that we gain 2 Enshroud windows every 2 minutes, plus we gain 1 more from Plentiful Harvest. We naturally are saving one of these 2 for the even minute burst and gaining 1 from Plentiful Harvest during the burst, so we have 1 spare Enshroud window to use whenever before. We usually use the spare one around the odd minute mark of the fight, as that's when we gain enough resources to actually use Enshroud. Inside this Enshroud, you naturally want to use 4 Void Reaping and Cross Reapings, alternating between the 2 with each usage. Use your Lemur Slices and always end by using your last Lemur stack on a Communio cast. For the remaining 2 Enshrouds, we do them under a fairly static burst window sequence. When your Arcane Circle has about 9 seconds left on its cooldown, you use Enshroud after your next combo GCD. Do not wait to start Enshroud by finishing the combo first. If it's time to start your double Enshroud, do it regardless if you are in mid-combo or not. If done correctly, your combo will not break. When starting the double Enshroud window, you will use 1 Void Reaping and 1 Shadow of Death. If you want to use a potion for this burst, you would drink it here. Alternate by using Cross Reaping and use another Shadow of Death, weaving in Arcane Circle. Alternate again by using Void Reaping, weaving in Lemur Slice as well. Alternate one last time by using Cross Reaping and weave in another Lemur Slice. End your Enshroud window by casting Communio. Then use your Plentiful Harvest and enter your second Enshroud. After your second Enshroud, use a combo GCD before weaving in Gluttony if you started your first Enshroud mid-combo. Else, instantly weave in Gluttony after your Communio and use up all of your remaining resources on Gibbet, Gallows, Soul Slices, and Unveiled Gibbet or Gallows. A few things that are worth noting about this burst. On the first 2-minute burst you start, you first Enshroud when there's 6 seconds left on the cooldown of your Arcane Circle instead of 9. For any subsequent even minute burst, you use the 9-second rule. We do this to better align Arcane Circle with the rate buffs of our allies. If you are mid-combo before you enter your first Enshroud, then you must use the next combo GCD after your second Enshroud's Communio and before Gluttony. Else you drop the combo and lose a lot of damage. This means that Gluttony can drift slightly, but it's the lesser of two evils and it's just something you have to deal with. If encountering 3 or more targets, then you still want to use the double Enshroud windows. However, inside of your Enshrouds, use Grim Reaping and Lemur's Scythe instead of Void Reaping, Cross Reaping and Lemur's Slice. Here's an example of double Enshroud being done. Reaper has a few unique utility abilities that we can talk about. Hell's Ingress teleports the Reaper 15 yalms forwards and leaves behind a portal. Elf's Egress teleports the Reaper 15 yalms backward and also leaves behind a portal. These two movement abilities share a cooldown of 20 seconds and allow you to teleport back to the portal left behind by the opposing ability. Using either of these abilities also grants you a buff which makes your next Harpy instant cast. Arcane Crest applies a barrier onto yourself which absorbs 10% of your maximum HP for 5 seconds. The timing of this ability is tight, but it has a short cooldown of 30 seconds and can absorb a great deal of damage. Use this frequently to help out your healers. From level 84 onwards, the barrier also applies a regen onto your party members if the entire barrier is consumed, making it one of the strongest self-mitigation tools in the game. Alongside these two movement abilities and your self-mitigation option, Reaper gains access to the melee roll actions. The first one is Second Wind, which heals you for a considerable amount of health on use. Leg Sweep stuns the target if they are stunnable, which most bosses are not. The ability doesn't see much usage outside of niche content. Next is Bloodbath, which places a buff onto you, healing you every time you deal physical damage to the boss. Feint lowers the target's physical damage dealt by 10% and magical damage dealt by 5% for 10 seconds. This is great to combo with any physical raid wights or hard-hitting tank busters. If it goes unused for a while though, do not feel afraid to use it on magical damage raid wights as well. Keep in mind that most parties run 2 melee DPS and both have access to Feint. If used at the same time, they will override each other, so spread them out accordingly. If you're in a static, then try to coordinate the usage of Feint with your healers as they generally will know where they want it the most. Arm's Length is your knockback immunity. It also doubles up in usage by making anyone that strikes you slowed, reducing their auto attack speed. Lastly, you have True North, which allows you to ignore all positionals for 10 seconds. Use this if you're ever forced out of your positional spots, but you have to use positional GCDs anyway. That said, Reaper is very flexible in when it uses its positionals, as their positionals are gauge bound. So, if you're out of True North charges, then you can alternatively delay your positionals as well, as long as you don't overcap your gauges or delay any burst by doing it. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, then please consider subscribing for more Final Fantasy content. A special thanks to the Reaper theory crafters in helping me fact check and providing me with footage of Reaper.